We're going to make the SE4 the best iPhone SE we've ever created. Whew, that's good, Tim, because I've been kind of missing the smaller iPhones by making it bigger. In fact, it has the exact same great OLED display from the iPhone 16. Oh. Okay, I suppose you're just putting a slower chip in it, or... Nope, the iPhone SE4 will have Apple Intelligence, so the great performance you've come to expect from iPhone 16. Oh! Well, that's pretty good. Is it just got worse battery life, or... Thanks to the upgraded Apple modem design, the battery life will be the same great length you expect from iPhone 16. Okay, Tim, this is just sounding more and more like an iPhone 16. Does it have like a notch or something? Nope. The new iPhone SE has the amazing Dynamic Island with support for live activities. Okay, Tim, this is frickin' the exact same phone. What's different here, okay? Is the camera worse? The SE4 is rocking the 48 megapixel sensor that you've come to love from the iPhone 16. Oh my god, Tim, why don't you just cut the price on the iPhone 16? Wouldn't that be easier? Like, what is it, really? Like, there's gotta be a catch. Are the colors worse? Well, the SE4 comes in a stunning new product red. Tim, okay, wait a second. This just sounds way too good to be true. Everything about the SE4 sounds amazing. How the heck are you gonna sell this thing for like several $100s cheaper than an iPhone 15 or 16? Well, it doesn't have the ultra-wide lens. Oh, okay. I mean, I feel like most of us could live without that. And the storage starts at 64 gigs. I'm gonna smack the crap out of you. Wow. Oh, tender. Right, seriously, the more and more that we're hearing about the SE4, the more and more I just can't believe it's real. It just sounds like way too good of a bargain in my head between Apple wanting Apple Intelligence on more iPhones, so of course that involves shipping a cheaper iPhone with 8 gigs of unified memory. Not a big deal for Android, but also, yeah, particularly rare for Apple. And sure, I could see a lot of the tech community being upset that it has a 60 hertz display, but is that really surprising anyone, considering they're still shipping the iPhone 15 and 16 with 60 hertz displays? So no one was really anticipating a ProMotion display to come to the lower end iPhone, right? Same thing with USB 2.0 for the USB-C speeds. It's like, yeah, of course. And I think most of us could understand not having an ultra-wide lens because this just sounds way too similar to Apple's current flagship model. So either there's some kind of leak or report that is wrong, or Apple's gotta raise the price pretty substantially. I would be shocked if all of these things came in at $429, the current starting price of the SE3. Never really liked that thing. It was way too similar to the SE2. They basically just slapped 5G in it and called it a day. And more of the reports coming forward are making it even sound less different from what has already been released with the iPhone 16 series. Like, now we're seeing in iOS support documents the Dynamic Island show up. And in my previous video, Thumbnails and Topics, we had discussed this and thought that that was going to be one of the more differentiating features between the iPhone 15 and the SE4. It was like, okay, yeah, you still get the Dynamic Island if you spend a little bit more money. Now they're saying even that is making its way to the SE. I mean, I suppose it could come down to manufacturing simplicity. Maybe Apple has already switched over so many of their assembly lines to building, you know, true depth camera systems that are optimized for the Dynamic Island, so just keeping around the notch for the sake of being a little bit worse than the newer iPhones reached a point where it wasn't even saving money anymore, and Apple could probably keep costs low by keeping the display panels the same across as many different iPhone models as possible. And of course, this probably helps software development stay simple. Like, probably already a little confusing to be updating your apps and your software for, okay, these phones have notches, these phones have big notches, and these phones have small notches, but then these phones have Dynamic Island, so Apple was like, you know what, let's just rip the band-aid off, let's just have a Dynamic Island across basically the entire lineup, because most of us are anticipating the SE4 to replace the outgoing iPhone 14 and 14 Plus, which always sucked. Don't let the door hit you on the way out, lightning. But yes, theoretically, that means we'll have SE4 with USB-C, Dynamic Island, and iPhone 15, 16, and the upcoming 17 series, all gonna be rocking Type-C and their Dynamic Islands with, you know, fairly full-screen displays, technically slightly thinner bezels on the front, but pretty much the only way to be able to differentiate iPhone models in the future is gonna be the camera bump design. It's like, okay, the SE just has one little dot caveat, and then the iPhone 17 series is maybe gonna have longer camera bars, and then the Pros are gonna have thick, chunky camera bars. Other than that, it's all just the same rounded, cornered rectangle on the front with OLED and Face ID. I guess this is the world we're living in. All these phones are gonna become indistinguishable, and this channel will officially have to retire because we've run out of things to talk about. But my one caveat that I think Apple could be playing as a trick that I mentioned earlier in the skit, but a lot of you suckers out there skip the skits, so now you're just wasting everyone's time. My theory is that as amazing of a deal as the SE4 sounds, with its bigger display, its OLED panel, a great 48 megapixel rear sensor, and Type-C, plus first iPhone with its in-house design modems, which means decent battery life, hopefully, I think that may mean that Apple is still going to start out the SE4 with just 64 gigs of storage. And Apple knows we hate that, especially in 2025. I'm sure that's going to tick off most of the tech community. Like, oh my god, you're charging $500 for a phone with 64 gigs in 2025? And I say that with the nerdy Polar Express kid voice, but I do kind of agree with it. It is very petty. It probably costs Apple next to nothing on the NAND end to switch between 64 gigs and 128, or frankly, even 256. But the point is to spread out the margins across a wider lineup. That's why you'll notice Samsung does the same thing with storage, Microsoft does the same thing with storage and RAM. No, it does not cost the company that much more to swap out 16 gigs of RAM with 32 or 64 gigs of RAM. It honestly probably costs them a couple bucks, but the reason they charge you an extra $200, $400, or $800 to spec up your PC is because those base model trims have really low margins, but they can compensate for those low margins by overcharging for the add-ons, because they know if any of these companies, I don't care if it's Google, Samsung, Microsoft, Apple, if any of them actually let you price up the storage and RAM based on what the part actually costs, it would be like $2 or $4 extra. Therefore, nobody would actually buy the base model. Everybody would just buy the maxed out model, and the margins would be lower because the overall product has to perform a certain way for the company to survive, to keep the lights on, to pay for R&D, to pay for marketing, all of those everyday operating expenses of the company. So it's frustrating and it's annoying, but I just feel like there's way too many good things going for the SE4 at this stage. Now knowing that they are going to ship it with the dynamic island as well, meaning from the front, the average consumer is basically going to have no idea the difference between an SE4 and a 17 Pro. They have to do something that the everyday consumer might care about, and I think that something will be charging you an extra 50, or maybe it's an extra $100 just to get 128 gigs of storage on an SE4, and everyone's gonna say, hey, that's penny pinching, or Apple's being too petty. In fact, if I spec up for 128 gigs, this is almost the same price as an iPhone 15. Exactly. That's the exact mindset Apple wants you to have going into this, because I think Tim Cook is the master of the decoy effect. Highlighted by Marquez in the past, it's basically trying to confuse the customer by having a certain price ladder and by making you think, well, you know, if you're gonna buy an iPhone, you want this for the long haul, right? You want to have some decent storage. 64 gigs isn't enough. No. You gotta spec it up to 128 gigs. And oh, if you spec it up, you're actually only $100 away from an iPhone 15, which is $700. So you might as well spend a little bit more on a 15, but you care about battery life, right? Well, if you care about battery life, you might as well spec up for a 15 plus. And oh my god, at the price of a 15 plus, you might as well go with a 16 plus. It's only $100 more at this stage, and Apple has figured out that pricing ladder argument that people walk through when they walk into an Apple store, it works. It technically results in people spending more money than they would have otherwise. Even though the product out the gate is probably not worth it, people go in there and they don't want their trip to the Apple store to be wasted. So they're like, well, I'm gonna walk out of here with something nice, and I guess I ended up with a 16 Pro Max, even though I walked in hoping to spend $500. What do you guys think? Is the SE4 still gonna be shipping 64 gigs in 2025? Or do you think the Dynamic Island reports are wrong? Feel free to make predictions, because all of this is going to be revealed within a matter of weeks now. It's end of January, and we'll probably get an unveiling and a launch date for the SE4 around mid-March. So feel free to drop your predictions and thoughts in the comments below, and thank you to everybody supporting this channel directly. Seriously, helps us out a ton, as does just watching these videos. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I will see you all in the next one.